Right now, let's swing back to another, and that's putting roofs over people's heads. Homelessness, tent encampments. Hamilton has a series of meetings ongoing right now, and they had another one last night downtown at the convention center, which was well attended by all means, people that were there. It was lively at times. It got a little heated at times because it's a very passionate issue. I don't know if they accomplished a whole lot, though. Let me bring John Best into the conversation. John has been following this story. He is the publisher of the Bay Observer. John, good to have you back on the program. Your thoughts about what you heard about last night, about the way the city is handling this, the responses that they got, and I guess to use the old football analogy, are we moving the yardstick here at all?
I don't think so, Bill. Unfortunately, I watched the entire meeting, and I rewatched a bit of it today. There was so much happening at that meeting. It was a little more controlled than the meeting that happened last week on the mountain. They got rid of the red and green cards, which some people objected to. Although, I would say that, when you suppress people expressing their real thoughts on an issue, you get a lot of grumbling and talking over people, which we did see some of that last night. But, the takeaway from the meeting is that we're no further along than we were when staff originally presented this encampment protocol back in the early spring. They were told to go away and do some public consultation. They're 2/3 of the way through that now. Many questions were asked to the head of housing, Michelle Baird, and she didn't have answers, and that is no reflection on her. She doesn't have answers because council hasn't made any decisions. And speaking of Michelle Baird, you have to give her credit. Standing up there, all kinds of incoming questions, some of them hostile, and she just kept her cool. And so I thought she really did, a great job, both at this meeting and the one last. But the bottom line is she has very little to work with in terms of trying to answer people's questions. And, the clip that you had in your news, I think, was the telling one. Here we've got Sir John A. Macdonald. It's been closed for years and years. An obvious downtown, at least temporary solution. And, the chair of the Board of Education issues a letter saying, well, it's not available for temporary housing because we're negotiating with the province to demolish the thing. And the silos, both within the city of Hamilton and between education and the city of Hamilton, and to some degree even between Hamilton and the province, are so obvious. One of our members should get on the phone or go and see Stephen Lecce right now and say we can't have available empty schools and homeless encampments if there's some way of putting the two together and reducing the suffering of these people. There's a lot of bureaucratic nonsense going on, Bill, that Doug Ford or somebody, I think, could kind of cut through if they were so inclined.
Well, but there is the problem, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. It's the silo situation in which we're being governed. Sir John A. Macdonald, by the way, for our London listeners, or others outside the city, is a rather large high school that's actually almost kitty-cornered to First Ontario Centre, Cops Coliseum. And it's a huge tract of land. It's not just the building itself. There's a large playing field there, and it's been vacant for, 5-6 years now at least?
Yes.
Probably more. And the conundrum here is, what are we going to do with it? Well, it belongs to the Board of Education, not to the city of Hamilton. So the city really can't just say, okay, we'll move them in next week. And the board is saying no. Somebody else brought up Delta Secondary, which is a similar old stately school in the east end of the city, which again is vacant, not being used right now. But it's not as simple as just opening the door and say, okay, fine, here, you people over here, you people over here. There are liability issues, there's insurance issues, a number of things that have to go on. There's security issues that have to. It's not a simple solution. And as you say, the easiest way is just say no. We don't own it and we can't buy it. So, go on to plan B. I think what I got out of the meeting yesterday, John, is there's inevitability here that a lot of people don't want to get their heads around is that we're going to have tent encampments for the foreseeable future. And I don't know how long that future is going to be, but they're happening one way or another.
Well, they are partly because of these problems that we just talked about with a large vacant school. Even the property on the school, if there's a reason why people can't be inside the school, there's certainly a large piece of land there. And at the very minimum, you've got a building that's got hopefully operating washrooms and some of those kind of amenities. And I guess what I would say to all of that is, these buildings belong to the Board of Education. Well, yes, they do. They belong to the people of Ontario who have paid for them. And there has to be a way of, I can't believe we're this far down the road. And is there anywhere you can go where you could actually access a list of publicly owned lands in Hamilton that are either owned by boards of education, the city, or the two senior governments? Where's that inventory? It may exist, but it just seems to me that there's so much finger pointing, excuse me, and it's beyond belief. And the frustration of that crowd last night, it wasn't so much that the frustration was around, do you support encampments or don't you? A lot of it had to do with just they can't understand, and nor should they understand why governments can't make a vacant building available, even just get us through this winter. The other property that was talked about, I think, in some of the email exchanges before the meeting, was that whole James Street North complex that was all public housing. It's now shut down. So somebody said, well, why can't we put an encampment there? Couldn't we at least put a tent encampment there? And the answer is, well, the CNR is, we're in a legal dispute with the CNR. Well, that legal dispute is over a proposed development that's coming. In the meantime, the city owns that property. They can do what they want with it in terms of allowing temporary use. So there's a lot of excuse making and finger pointing and siloing, and I'll tell you, it was frustrating. It was painful to watch last night, really.
Well, and what exacerbates it is there were a number of calls by both city officials and some of the people that made presentations to suggest that both the federal and provincial governments have to be part of the solution here. But when you get comments like we got from Premier Ford yesterday, he was asked about this. He wasn't at the meeting, clearly, but he was making an announcement in another part of the province, and during the Q&A this came up. And he says he doesn't like tent encampments. He says it's not feasible for families living near them, and residents in the tents need to, quote unquote, move on. Move on to where, Mr. Premier? I mean, if that's the attitude of the provincial government, don't hold your breath waiting for any help from them to try to get this problem solved.
Well, he probably needs to spend a little more time. It's about a $5 cab ride from Queen's Park to Allen Gardens where he can get a better look at these tent encampments. There's probably not that many up in Etobicoke where he lives, but yeah, it's really frustrating. But also getting back to the city, Bill, so this meeting takes place the evening of the day that council starts setting priorities, and they had their first priority session, and you got to give the mayor credit for pulling that together. It's got to be like herding cats dealing with that organization. But they were talking about asset management, and here's where I'll probably get myself in some trouble. But we're talking about managing assets. We're spending $3.4 billion of public money on a transit system at a time when we had a $2 billion infrastructure deficit, and then last year it was revealed that we got another $1 billion in underground pipes that need to be fixed. When we're talking about priorities, what about that priority? You got councillors very much in favor of that, who are also very sympathetic to the homeless people. And I can only conclude from that, Bill, that they must believe in Ronald Reagan's trickle-down economics, that somehow by building this system, this LRT system, that the benefits will actually trickle down as far as homeless people or people with who need affordable housing. And I don't think it's going to happen. And, if we go back to 2007, 2008, when this LRT idea was first floated, the thought was that we needed it in part to revive our moribund development industry. We needed it to stimulate growth. We needed it to stimulate apartment buildings and all kinds of development. I would argue that given the current situation with the pressure on housing, with Bill 23, that development is going to take place with or without a train running down King Street. You just need a good transit system to connect the dots. And, you got to remember that Doug Ford did at one point say we could have the $1 billion with no strings attached. So, I think if we want to really set priorities, I think there's an area where we need to see if that money can be diverted to some of these far more urgent needs.
Well, and I know they keep throwing dollar figures around like that. And, well, we can build, quote unquote, affordable housing along the route in some of those other buildings. Well, the city hasn't got any money to do that right now. And the province doesn't seem inclined to do that. I don't see the private sector jumping on board for something like that either. So, we have to, I think, look at this realistically. And they heard some of the stories from people that were making presentations last night about people that are about to be evicted from their apartment. And one gentleman in particular had moved back here because of an ailing father. And, the money he gets from ODSP doesn't even cover a rent for a one-bedroom apartment here. So that's the dilemma they're facing. Those stories are important. It may not get us any closer to a solution, but what it did, it painted a picture of just how severe the circumstances are for these people. What choice does this guy have? He's being evicted because he can't pay the rent. And like he says at the end of the month, I'll be living in a tent. What other options do I have? We have to give them options. We can't just wring our hands and say, boy, if the feds and province gave us the money, we could do this. If they gave them the money this afternoon, John, as soon as at noon today, they can't start building right away. It's not going to happen. This problem is not going to be solved. And you're absolutely right. We're talking, we're just about into July now. They're not going to put a hammer to a piece of wood and start building houses even this year, in this calendar year, probably, for a variety of reasons. So what are we doing about it? And it's going to get cold. And, you look at all these empty buildings and say, well, yeah, but you can't have that one. Somebody's got to get their heads around this and start, it's everybody's problem. It's not just the city council's problem.
It's an urgent issue, and the authority exists to cut through some of these jurisdictional issues. Just crazy to be even thinking about tearing down that school right in the heart of the city, which has had encampments outside it, in the past. Absolutely insane that those two boats are passing in the night. 1,000 people show up for a meeting to underline the urgency of finding shelter for people. It's just insane. And if it takes a senior government to sort that out, we've really got to do something about this public-owned property that's owned by all three levels. We've got to get a handle on exactly where it is and what the possibilities are. But I certainly think that the woman who spoke out about Sir John A. was on the right track. That's the kind of sensible, she asked the question, get the water turned on, get people in there. And you know what? The fact that we can't do that is an embarrassment. It's an absolute embarrassment. And there were a number of people who were in encampments that spoke last night, and some of their stories were very compelling. But there's so much posturing by council, and it's just, I'll tell you, you saw people, I watched it on Cable 14, and you saw people towards the end of the meeting walking out, shaking their heads. And that's kind of, I think pretty well sums it up, really.
Well, I don't think anybody went in there with the illusion that was going to get solved last night. And as you say, as people left, did they have any inclination at all that the city was moving in the right direction, that they had at least a list of places or a list of options at this stage? Because I'm not getting that feeling at all. I think what's going to have to happen here is a couple of things. First of all, city council, who ultimately will make this decision, by the way, are going to have the courage to stand up to a bunch of residents and simply say, we're putting tent encampments here, 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 and here. It's not going to be forever. But it's got to happen because the numbers are growing, John, as you heard last night. They're not getting smaller because of the economic situation that they're in, and something's got to happen here. And in the meantime, what's your plan for the future? They still don't have one. This council, and I know it's a relatively new council, but you signed up for the job. Their expertise right now is vacillating, and this is not the time for vacillation. It's the time for courage and some vision. And I'm not hearing a whole lot of it from the elected officials. And to your point, don't blame city staff for this. They don't set policy. It's that 16 people around the horn that do that.
Yeah, from a policy standpoint, city staff are exactly where they were 4 months ago when they were asked to start this public consultation. They have no more information, no more direction, and nobody seems to want to get their arms around the entirety of the piece of business, which includes why can't we go into Sir John A. or other vacant public buildings around town? Why are we accepting that and saying that means we now need to continue with tents? It's really crazy, Bill, but there we are.
Well, we'll see what happens and the city responds to it. I'm not holding my breath for any of the immediate reaction to it, though. John, as always, thanks so much for this. Really appreciate the time today.
My pleasure, Bill.
John Best from the Bay Observer.